when we think about kind of grants and the opportunity there is we do view this as a multiplier and as ways for us to kind of have even more opportunity to connect with audiences that we otherwise would not in a traditional way. So in some categories, we could think about certain grants as almost an extension to what maybe some folks would consider as like an awareness play for some folks. Or there are definitely, let's say, for example, folks that are running workshops or courses that need increased distribution. Like that's a clear play towards increased activation. Or a broad goal that we do have as a company is we do have this ultimate goal of trying to train the next generation of builders as well. And I think with that overarching goal, there's huge opportunities and a big hypothesis around if we can empower more folks who are building resources, who are inspiring others, who are kind of getting that type of opportunity out there and showing people what's possible with web design, then we are driving back towards that overarching company goal as well.
Hey everyone, I'm Joel Premack, host of the Community-Led Growth Show. Today I'm joined by Emily Lonetto, Director of Community at Webflow. Thank you so much for being on the show today, Emily.
Thank you so much for having me. Great to be here.
Of course. I'm so excited to have you on the show and for the couple of major themes that we're going to hit on today. But first, before we dive into those, would you please give all of our listeners a brief 30-second intro about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. So hi, everyone. Like Joel mentioned, I'm the Director of Community over at Webflow. I've spent the last 10 years or so of my career kind of jumping in between various growth roles, specifically around product-led companies, until kind of stumbling onto the power that when a product-led company has a strong community, what does that look like and kind of what type of growth does that unlock? And that's led me from jumping into B2C companies like Tilt to establishing marketplaces over at my time at PartnerStack and Clio to fostering community as early adopters to get validation over at VoiceFlow and eventually landed me here at Webflow, where community is pretty core to everything that we were building and the tool that we're providing.
Amazing. And I would 1,000% agree as an outsider looking in that community is central to many things at Webflow. So congratulations, y'all have done an exceptional job. First thing that I'm really excited to get into is about a little over a year ago when you all raised your 120 million Series C in March of 2022. I also saw in that same announcement that you all launched a $10 million grants program. So I'm just really curious because I have never heard of a community grants program like this before. So I want to know a little bit more about how did it come to be?
Yeah, so the community grants program is very much so a very unique program. It's very rare that a company sets aside any amount of cash, let alone a meaningful chunk like $10 million to invest back into the community that it supports. So ultimately, like the way that came about is very much so because community is so core to the audience that we serve and the way that we build. We started to identify that in order for us to really grow the category and truly kind of really align with our mission of empowering everyone to build for the web, that also involved trying to empower others who are creating really fantastic resources, to leading workshops, to trying to like inspire folks that are maybe in different locales, different languages, different spaces, or who are working on, let's say, resources or projects that realistically we're not going to have in our roadmap for any foreseeable future, but would love to support. And that's really where the $10 million came from was, number one, how can we support those folks? How can we fuel a next generation of folks that have even more people to look up to, even more roads to inspiration, but also how can we do that in a very meaningful way that's not just in the form of support via our existing programs. And I think that it's really a true testament that not only did our executive team sign off on launching a fund like this, especially one that is not as core to, let's say, how does this drive immediately back to revenue, or how does this immediately provide business ROI? But instead, how are we actually investing into the people that we say we believe in? Where do we quite literally put our money where their mouths are there?
I love that. And so we're going to dive into this because this, as you said, it's a super unique program. And I need to know a lot more about it because I'm just naturally curious about it. So, my first question is I saw when I was checking it out online that there are essentially three types of applications that members of Webflow's community can apply for, or three different tiers, I should say. And so, with that, I'm just really curious what are like the criteria essentially for each tier, and how did you create the three tiering structure?
Yeah. So ultimately, like our goal, especially when we started to think about early days of grants, is we wanted to be able to support, to seed, and to help scale the initiatives that people are working on. And so that kind of brought us to let's start by kind of introducing these three categories to help also define kind of what type of help do they need from us, even beyond the financial gains of that. So from the support side, this is people who may have already started something. They're looking to kind of take that to kind of the next level, a little bit beyond MVP, and are looking for support, whether that is on the financial side of things, whether it's marketing and discoverability, whether it is expertise from the team to kind of help them get to that next stage. And for a lot of people in our community, they all kind of a lot of them sit in that bucket where they've tried something, they started to grow a micro community, they started to grow a smaller following, and now is time to kind of start to invest more deeply in that. And so that category allows us to give them a little bit of runway to explore that idea more meaningfully. The next one is seed. And this is for folks who have a net new idea, have this thought process of like, hey, I really want to start this thing. Here's how I'm going to go about it. Here are the things that I want to be held accountable to. And we work more in tandem with them to give them a little bit of resources at the beginning so they can test that out, so they can kind of start that fire. And that allows us to also connect like the right people internally with them to help support and spitball that idea. And lastly, we have scale. And this is for people who are established. They've started to make their name. They have followings. They have people that connect with their mission and what they're building. And this is really about drastically putting a multiplier on what it is that they are doing. So some core examples in that one are like Useful School and ADP List, who both have kind of really proven they deeply care about leveling up their communities, leveling up opportunities for folks. And we wanted to make sure that we partner with them directly to make that even more possible.
That's amazing. And thank you so much for sharing a little bit more insight into those three tiering structures and essentially how each one is then used, or how each member of Webflow's community would read it and say, I fit into this bucket for my needs. Mm-hmm. So you mentioned a little bit earlier how the $10 million grants program does not formally roll into something that shows immediate business impact. However, I have to imagine somewhere in the conversation that there is a way that you all like to measure the impact and show ROI for the grants being given out. And my assumption is yes, but I would love to hear from you if that is the case. And if so, how are you all showing that ROI to other stakeholders within Webflow? And again, back to your own team to say like, yes, this is a meaningful type of project to support.
Yeah, so I think one of the beautiful things about that is that over the course of us just running and working on Webflow, the community has had serious high correlation to, increase LTV, like increased opportunity, increased activation. There are so many metrics that we know are very correlated to those that are active and have connections to the community. So that's kind of, thankfully, is something that's kind of known and understood, period, at the company. When we think about kind of grants and the opportunity there is we do view this as a multiplier and as ways for us to kind of have even more opportunity to connect with audiences that we otherwise would not in a traditional way. So in some categories, we could think about certain grants as almost an extension to what maybe some folks would consider as like an awareness play for some folks. Or there are definitely, let's say, for example, folks that are running workshops or courses that need increased distribution. Like that's a clear play towards increased activation. Or a broad goal that we do have as a company is we do have this ultimate goal of trying to train the next generation of builders as well. And I think with that overarching goal, there's huge opportunities and a big hypothesis around if we can empower more folks who are building resources, who are inspiring others, who are kind of getting that type of opportunity out there and showing people what's possible with web design, then we are driving back towards that overarching company goal as well.
Awesome. And that's a really interesting one because it's such a long-term forward-thinking goal that you all are now through this program able to take meaningful micro steps to support it that then in the future have hopefully larger implications. That's one of the more beautiful things about community. I love it. Oh.
Yeah, it's very rare and very rewarding to kind of have this balance of what could be categorized as a long-term goal and still have things that we can action on in the short term and still have ways that we can kind of thread that into our traditional fiscal year planning, which is very rare. Because it is a lot easier to say, of course, we want to empower the next gen or we want to invest in long-term growth, but it's a lot easier to forget about that in favor of immediate turnaround.
100% agree with that. I'm curious. I know you mentioned some very notable examples of grants that have been approved, but I'm wondering if there are any ones that have really stood out to you in the team or any really meaningful ones that the community has really rallied around and just loved and cheered on and shot it to wild success.
Yeah, so I think that one of the things that I've really focused on, especially with the earlier entries from grants, is trying to almost over-index on who are these budding names, these budding opportunities where grants can really make a huge difference in the amount of people that they can resonate with and reach. There are loads of examples, more than I think we could probably talk about in the entire podcast for this. But some that kind of come top of mind are, for example, we have a community member named Victor who runs a community out in Lagos called Tech Junior. And they have various chapters in and around Nigeria that are focused on empowering children or folks that are kind of early in their, I'm trying to figure out what I want to do career-wise, to learn these technical skills early so they can participate in some of the fantastic STEM opportunities that are out there and are even more accessible with some of the new trends to how businesses and teams are forming. So with the grants program and with their involvement, we've been able to see like hundreds of kids go through cohorts of learning and fantastic photos and videos shared back with the team that, like, if you do not find that heartwarming, like, you have other things that are going on. And we're definitely also seeing, even as a different example, we had a community member named Emily Giordano who started a podcast kind of throughout the pandemic called the Great Design Lead podcast, really focused on stripping back a lot of the personalities, the people behind building. And I arguably think she is like one of the best interviewers and UX minds that is entering the workforce right now. And being able to partner with her and support that journey and see so many incredible inspirational figures that she's gotten a chance to talk with and introduce to the community has been also just incredibly exceptional. And a lot of folks rallying behind her success and the story she's provided.
Oh, I love both of those examples. I think from my perspective, hearing those, I think there's a common thread of just really connecting with and telling stories that I am seeing through both of those meaningful examples, that you're seeing the story of changing lives and changing the potential outcomes that people are able to achieve through education, and then the stories of people who are currently building in the market today. So thank you for sharing those with us.
No problem.
So we talked a lot about, first, the community grants program, which I love and am 100% obsessed with. But we're now going to pivot into a somewhat secondary topic. And I know that Webflow is a PLG company. PLG is having a thriving moment right now in the world. We're seeing Snowflake, Datadog, tons of other public SaaS companies who are PLG continue to win and do significantly better than others in the market, as well as private ones, such as Figma getting acquired. We love it for them. So I would really love to hear a little bit more about how Webflow has been a like pioneer in this space and why you all integrated so much PLG into the community, and then therefore some of those experiments that you've run to intertwine the two.
Yeah, so PLG has been something that's kind of been like near and dear to like my own heart and my own interest for years. Kind of most of my background being in growth and very much so invested in that side of the business. I think what is really, really interesting about Webflow's story is like it's so obvious to look at us now and be like, yes, like this is a good example of a PLG company. When in reality, like the very first stages of that was we were PLG out of necessity, out of survival at the beginning, where like Webflow's been around for almost 10 years now. And we were not a SaaS darling by any means for VCs. And the co-founders were bootstrapped for the vast majority of Webflow's time, which kind of really changes the perspective of how can you really make a change and build a meaningful business? And that is either you have to help a ton of people or you have to help a few, but like very, very deeply. And that's kind of more of that enterprise play. And they really, really invested in the help as many people as possible. And I think that those early bootstrap days really forced them to think thoughtfully about the product loops that mattered, how to integrate sharing and collaboration and all of the product triggers that we all know and love in PLG style orgs to really be core parts of our product journey and continue to be today. And I think the second part about that is now that we have had kind of some successes there and we really kind of understand that as a core, it's actually unlocked more opportunities for us to think about alternative streams and customer journeys that unlock other growth loops for us. Like how similar to a degree our path from casual user to power user is from, let's say, power user to champion, which unlocks a sales-led approach. Or more opportunities for us to thread in how can we be more segmented, be more customized with the different modules or components within our product based on the users and the information that they tell us, which allows us to also further enhance and enrich the data that we have on our users and thread in where community and product feedback loops fit in. And so some of the things that have been really fruitful from experiments that way is us being able to kind of dive in and not only identify segments that fill out whatever onboarding survey that we're all familiar with, but also kind of partner our internal teams with councils of folks that quite literally are those personas. So instead of operating off of let's say, Google Doc of here is a persona that we have kind of thought through as a team, we can literally connect with people within that and drive that exact product feedback loop into the product, which helps to kind of trigger more and more velocity around how quickly we can grow via product led. And on the flip side, it's also allowed us to open up other experiments around how specific can we even get with which segments belong into PLG style loops, or maybe there are ways that we can do a little bit more manual testing to drive that back into our product roadmap. And I wish that I could get into some of the super nitty gritty stuff that we're getting into right now to kind of rethink some new ways that we can build this year. But I can confidently tell you we are always testing, which is very exciting.
That is definitely very exciting. And now I cannot wait to see what you all do in 2023. So I will not ask for any more details. I will be good. But I'm really curious when you're thinking about some of these PLG experiments and intertwining them into community programs, are there specific criteria or elements that you look for to say, yes, these two things clearly belong together and help one another, versus this is very in one side's camp, but not really helping and adding value to the other?
Yeah, so I think like there's a few different ways of thinking about it. Like one is based on audiences. Does this help everybody? Does this help a subset? Does this help a sub of that subset? That is like a pretty easy way of us thinking about where does that fall within the funnel? How important or impactful may that be? The second one is also based on like technical ability and leveling, as I like to think about it. So, for example, we could get, let's say, a huge uptick in questions from CST and the community talking about, let's say, a like level 10 feature, which is like you have to have 10 levels of knowledge of our tool and a use case and a specific, let's say, a specific subset or constraints to hit that problem. That might be a very important problem in that exact moment to maybe a small subset of users. But unless that's replicable or unless that is, let's say, a super high impact problem for that level, then getting a better understanding of like, what are some things that impact almost everybody, like, let's say, components or how people literally design wireframes in Webflow, that might take a much higher precedent in, is this a PLG sprint or is this like more of a campaign or something that we can kind of put together elsewhere? So I would say those two are pretty core, but of course there's always exceptions, and there's always room for kind of creativity and us trying to re-level things or audit where there are opportunities or gaps that our product may not even touch right now, which comes more and more as we think about expansion.
Awesome. So as we kind of wrap up this portion of our conversation, I need to know, for other community professionals who work at PLG companies or companies that are looking to add some PLG elements, what would you say are some lessons learned or best practices that they should incorporate into intertwining PLG and community together?
I think the biggest thing is like, if you are running a community org in a product-led company, or you're looking to kind of integrate more of a community-led approach, you need to make sure that you build a ton of bridges. This is like setting the foundation on how do you work cross-functionally with the different departments like CST, marketing, product, and even sales, and establishing like, what are the regular artifacts that you are sharing and collaborating on, versus be vocal about the places where you want to get your team plugged in and community members plugged in. And what that can look like is anything from helping to set the foundation on every time we have a go-to-market strategy and it impacts like this audience, like here's where my team should get involved. Here's where we can help. Here's where we can help facilitate or increase distribution of that message. Versus with CST, going back and forth and saying, hey, let's identify trends together. Like, here's what we're seeing on the outside world. What are you seeing in terms of tickets? What are those themes? How can we create content? How can we partner with our teams to solve those so that we can change that narrative, that we can approach that sentiment? and with sales, really trying to establish, okay, what is that archetype of user that's going to help you better understand the end user that you're talking to or win over internally? And on a community side, how can we build meaningful, almost micro onboarding or micro journeys to get more and more people similar to or as close to that narrative as possible?
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing those. And as we head towards the end of our episode together, I would love for you to hear your three community trends in B2B SaaS that you're watching for in 2023 and beyond.
Yeah, I mean, always looking at trends. They're the fun, shiny objects to keep in mind. I think like a big one for me right now is more emphasis on analytics and sentiment. Long has everyone in community been kind of plagued with, oh, well, we can't track that, or that's super hard to communicate the value of. I do think that there's a lot of really interesting strides, especially with sentiment analysis that's coming out as of late. So keeping my eyes on tools like Common Room and Loud and Clear and lots of places that are just kind of getting better at analyzing that data. Number two, I think collaboration and co-creation, really huge. If you have a community, if you're growing with that, finding more ways that you can actually build with the experts that know your product in niches versus prescribing how they should be using your product that way, I think is also like very exciting and is something that like I really enjoy watching and engaging with. And third, very much so looking at some of the trends of seeing community getting more embedded into strategic arms of companies where people are looking at those leaders to be almost like internal advocates always and as like a center of knowledge. And the more and more that folks, I think, are structuring their teams and their own personal OKRs to kind of fall within that bucket, I am definitely seeing, I think, that being a huge driver for why community-led, product-led, featuring community becoming more and more topics of discussion.
Amazing. Those are great trends. I too am seeing many of those. So thank you so much for sharing those, Emily. Again, thank you for being on the Community-Led Growth Show today. If people want to follow and or connect with you after watching or listening to your episode, what are the best channels and or handles for them to use?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at Emily Lonetto. Same with LinkedIn. I don't find me on TikTok, but I'm there. And yeah, I'm more than happy to connect with any of you.
Awesome. Thank you so much and have a great day.